The road curved gently along the coastline, where the last traces of daylight had faded into a quiet blue dusk. The sound of waves carried in from somewhere beyond the cliffs, steady and low, like the world itself was breathing in a calm rhythm. Traveler walked slowly, taking in the faint glow of lanterns ahead. The village was small, almost hidden, resting between the sea and the rolling hills. From a distance, it looked like a cluster of soft lights gathered close together, each one swaying gently in the evening breeze. The air smelled of salt and wood. Smoke. Somewhere nearby, someone had lit a fire for the night, and its warmth drifted through the streets, mixing with the coolness that came from the water. Stone paths wound between little houses with tiled roofs, their windows glowing in amber. Light. Cats stretched lazily on doorsteps, their tails flicking once before settling again into stillness. The traveler stopped for a moment, standing at the edge of the village. It was quiet here, not silent, but filled with small, comforting sounds. The rustle of leaves, the slow crash of waves, a faint creak of a wooden sign swinging gently above a doorway. Everything moved at its own unhurried pace. Stepping further in, the traveler passed by a shop with shutters closed, baskets stacked neatly beneath a canopy. A little further, a bakery's door was left slightly open, and the warm scent of bread lingered in the air, even at this late hour. A soft laugh echoed from somewhere down the lane, followed by the shuffle of footsteps. Before the night grew still again, dot at the center of the village stood a square, small and simple, with a fountain, carved from stone. The water trickled quietly, catching the lantern light in tiny glimmers. Around it were wooden benches, some empty, some holding baskets and coats left behind, as though someone had only stepped away for a moment. The traveler placed a hand on the edge of the fountain and sat for a while, letting the stillness seep in. Above, the sky opened wide. Stars were beginning to appear, one after another, scattered across the fading blue like grains of salt on dark fabric. The traveler tilted their head back and watched them brighten slowly, listening to the fountain's steady rhythm until a lantern flickered on nearby dot. It came from a small inn tucked in the corner of the square. Its sign, painted with the faded shape of a seashell, swayed gently on its chain. The windows glowed with warm, welcoming light, and the soft murmur of voices inside drifted out through the open door dot. The traveler rose, feeling the weight of the day pressing down in a gentle, drowsy way. The inn's wooden floor creaked softly as they stepped inside. The air inside was warm, filled with the faint scent of herbs and firewood. A few villagers sat around small tables, speaking quietly over mugs of tea. At the far end, behind a polished wooden counter, stood the innkeeper, an older woman with kind eyes and a calm smile. "You look tired from the road," she said softly, her voice carrying the slow rhythm of someone who lived close to the sea. "You'll be needing a room." The traveler nodded, words feeling heavy and unnecessary in this place. The innkeeper handed them a small brass key, its surface smooth from many years of use, dot up the stairs. The room was simple, with wooden beams across the ceiling and a small window overlooking the square. A bed stood in the center, covered with a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender. A candle flickered on the bedside table, casting long shadows that moved gently across the walls. The travelers set their bag down, removed their shoes, and lay back on the soft bed. The faint sound of the ocean reached even here, weaving with the quiet creak of the inn's beams and the murmur of voices below. The quilt was warm. The pillow held the scent of clean linen. The traveler's eyes grew heavy. They let out a slow breath, feeling their bodies sink deeper into the mattress. Outside the window, the square had grown quieter. The fountain's trickle was steady, the lantern swayed gently, and the stars shone brighter overhead. The traveler closed their eyes, and the little seaside village kept watch through the night, asterisk the first light of morning crept softly into the room, touching the wooden floorboards in pale gold. The travelers stirred not from any noise, but from the way the air itself seemed to have shifted. It smelled faintly of sea mist drifting through the open window, cool and fresh, carrying with it the gentle hush of waves. For a moment, they simply lay still beneath the quilt, listening. The inn was quiet. Somewhere below, a door creaked, and footsteps moved across the floor. A kettle whistled faintly in the distance, followed by the clink of porcelain. The traveler rose slowly, stretching, letting the weight of sleep fall away. Outside the window, the square looked different than it had the night before. The lanterns had been put out, leaving only the soft wash of daylight across the cobblestones. A few villagers had begun to set up their stalls near the fountain, laying out baskets of fruit, fresh bread, and small bundles of herbs tied neatly with twine. The traveler washed their face in the basin, the water cool against their skin, then stepped into the hallway. The inn smelled of warm bread now, freshly baked. Downstairs, the innkeeper greeted them with the same calm smile. She placed a wooden plate on the table, a slice of bread still warm from the oven, butter that melted as soon as it touched, and a cup of tea that steamed gently in the morning light. "Best to start slow here," she said kindly, setting the cup down. "The sea teaches us that nothing needs to be rushed." The traveler nodded, smiling faintly, and ate quietly, letting the warmth of the tea spread through them. When breakfast was finished, they stepped outside into the square. The air was brighter now, though the sun was still low, hidden partly by a stretch of thin clouds. The fountain glimmered as droplets caught the light. The village had begun to wake fully. Children carried baskets for their parents, running across the square with quick steps before slowing down when they noticed the traveler watching. A fisherman walked past, his coat smelling of salt and seaweed, carrying nets over his shoulder. The market stalls filled gradually, voices weaving together in a gentle hum, not loud, never hurried, but steady and grounded like the tide coming in. The traveler moved slowly through the narrow lanes, cobbled paths winding between whitewashed houses. Some had shutters painted in faded blues and greens. Laundry swayed gently on lines strung between balconies. At one doorway, a woman knelt, watering pots of small, fragrant flowers, while a cat pressed itself against her knee dot as the traveler passed. She looked up and gave a quiet nod, the kind of greeting that felt unspoken, as though words weren't really needed here. Further on, the path opened to the harbor. Wooden boats rocked gently in the tide, their ropes creaking against the worn posts. The water shone with the reflection of the sky, shifting slowly as ripples touched its surface. A group of fishermen gathered near the docks, repairing nets with careful, patient hands. Their voices rose and felt like the sea itself, calm and low, with pauses long enough to let the gull's cries slip in between. The traveler leaned against a post, watching. There was something soothing about their work, the steady looping of rope, the quiet conversation, the way time seemed to move differently here. Nobody hurried. Nobody pushed. Everything flowed at the pace of the tide. The smell of salt was stronger here, mixing with the faint tang of tar from the wooden planks. A breeze carried it through, ruffling the traveler's hair and brushing against their skin, like a reminder that the sea was always near, always part of the village. A bell rang softly somewhere back in the square, calling out the hour. The fishermen didn't look up. The gulls wheeled overhead. The traveler closed their eyes for a moment, letting the rhythm of the harbor sink in, as if the air itself was teaching them how to breathe more slowly, more deeply. When they opened their eyes again, the village was bright with the fullness of morning. The market stalls glowed with color, oranges stacked neatly in baskets, small jars of honey glinting in the sun, hand-woven cloth draped over wooden rails. Children's laughter skipped through the air. Carried lightly on the breeze, the traveler walked slowly back toward the square, steps unhurried as though their body was beginning to fall into the same quiet rhythm as the village. And overhead, the clouds drifted on, while the sea kept whispering beyond the harbor walls. The square was livelier now, though never crowded. The traveler moved between the stalls, taking in the slow, easy rhythm of the morning. The smell of baked bread lingered in the air, joined by the faint sweetness of honey and the sharp freshness of herbs tied in little bundles. At one stall, an elderly man with weathered hands was arranging jars of sea salt. Each jar caught the light, crystals glowing faintly within the glass. He glanced up as the traveler approached, his eyes kind but clouded with age. "First time here?" he asked gently, his voice carrying the softness of someone who had lived. "Many quiet mornings like this, Dot." The traveler nodded. The old man smiled. "You'll find we don't move quickly in this village. The sea doesn't hurry, so neither do we. People who come here learn to breathe a little differently." He lifted one of the jars and set it carefully on the counter. "This salt," he added, "comes from the tides, collected and dried in the sun. It carries the taste of the sea, and maybe even its patience." The traveler thanked him, slipping a coin into his hand, and continued walking. The old man gave a slow nod, as though sealing a quiet understanding between them. A little further along, a woman in her middle years sat at a stall lined with woven baskets. Her hands worked steadily as she shaped reeds into soft, curved patterns. She didn't look up right away, only continued weaving with calm precision. "You remind me of someone," she said suddenly, her voice low but warm. "A traveler who came through here long ago. He stayed for a while and then moved on, but his kindness remained." She glanced up then, smiling faintly. The village remembers people even when they don't realize it. The traveler tilted their head, listening. She finished weaving the rim of a basket and set it down gently. "Take your time here," she said. "You'll see. The village will give you what you need, though it may be quieter than you expect." The traveler moved on, letting her words linger like a tide that rolled in slowly, then settled. Harbor wall, a fisherman sat repairing his nets. His face was lined by years of sun and salt air, yet his eyes were clear and steady. He looked up briefly, then returned to his work, fingers moving with a rhythm that seemed almost meditative. "People think fishing is about waiting for the sea to give something back," he said, not quite looking at the traveler. "But it's more about learning how to listen. The sea speaks. In its waves, its winds, its silences. If you wait long enough, it tells you what it will give." He tied another knot, pulled it tight, and then finally looked up. "It's the same with life, isn't it? You can fight for things, or you can listen and let them arrive in their own time." The traveler nodded quietly, though no words seemed needed. The fisherman gave a slight smile and returned to his nets, his movements steady and sure, as though his hands carried the memory of every tide he had ever known. The traveler stood for a while longer, watching the boats sway gently in the harbor, listening to the way voices and water blended together. The conversations were never rushed, never filled with more than what was needed. Each word seemed to hold weight, as though, in this village, silence was just as valuable as speech. Eventually, the traveler drifted back toward the fountain at the square's center. A few children played nearby, tossing small pebbles into the water and laughing softly when the ripples spread. A dog lay at the edge of the square, tail thumping lazily against the stones. The fountain's trickle continued, steady and calm, as though marking the rhythm of the day. The traveler sat down on one of the benches, letting the voices, the breeze, and the steady pulse of village life settle into them like a lullaby carried by the morning. And somewhere beyond the harbor wall, The sea answered with its own quiet voice, asterisk. As the day stretched on, the sun dipped slowly toward the horizon. The traveler lingered in the square, watching as the shadows of the buildings grew longer across the cobblestones. The market stalls had begun to close, baskets emptied, jars carefully packed away. The voices that had filled the morning air grew. Fewer, softer, leaving space once again for the sea's steady presence. A soft orange light spread across the sky, brushing the clouds with faint color. The fountain glimmered as the last of the sun touched its surface. Children gathered their toys and pebbles, their laughter fading into the distance as they were called home for supper. The traveler rose from the bench and wandered back toward the harbor. The boats rocked gently, ropes tugging against their posts in slow, steady movements. A few fishermen stood at the edge of the water, pulling in their final nets. Their silhouettes stretched long in the fading light, movements unhurried, as though they belonged entirely to the rhythm of the tide. The scent of salt and seaweed grew sharper as the breeze carried it inland. It brushed against the traveler's face, cool but not cold, like a hand resting gently on the skin. Somewhere nearby, gulls called once or twice before settling down for the night dot. As the light dimmed, lanterns began to flicker on across the village. One by one, little points of amber glowed along the narrow lanes, above doorways, and around the square. Their soft flames swayed gently in the evening air, spreading a warmth that contrasted the growing coolness of night dot. The traveler walked slowly through the streets, listening to the hush that came with the changing hour. Families sat behind shuttered windows, voices muted but warm. A violin played faintly in the distance, its notes drifting through the air, rising and falling like the tide itself. Drawn by the sound, the traveler followed the cobbled lane until it opened into a smaller square. There, a few villagers had gathered, seated on low wooden stools. An older man held the violin, his bow moving slowly, not with any urgency, but with care. The tune was simple, almost like a lullaby, its notes carrying softly into the night air. The villagers didn't speak much, they listened. Some nodded their heads in time, others simply closed their eyes, letting the music settle into them. The traveler found a place at the edge, leaning against a wall, and listened to the violin's melody blended with the sound of the sea, the hush of waves beyond the harbor wall, the occasional creak of wood, the distant call of a gull. Together, it felt like the village itself was singing. When the song ended, there was no applause, only a silence that seemed full, as though everyone had received exactly what they needed from the music. The violinist lowered his bow, set the instrument on his knee, and looked around at the gathered faces. "Evenings are for remembering," he said quietly, his voice carrying through the still air. "Not for rushing. The night holds us gently if we let it." The traveler held on to those words, feeling them linger even after the gathering slowly dispersed. Lanterns swayed in the breeze. The violinist packed his instrument with care. The night deepened. The traveler wandered back toward the inn, though without hurry. Each step seemed slower now, as if the village itself had taught their body a different rhythm, a rhythm that matched the waves. The lanterns, the soft hush of voices behind windows. The square was quiet again. The fountain's trickle was the only sound. The traveler paused there, resting a hand on the stone rim, and looked up at the sky. Stars had begun to gather overhead, countless and steady, spreading across the darkness like tiny lanterns of their own. The air was cooler now, filled with the scent of salt, smoke, and lavender from the gardens. It wrapped gently around the traveler as they stood still, breathing in, breathing out, feeling the day settle fully into night dot, and with the stars above and the sea beyond, the little village seemed to hold the world in a quiet, protective embrace. The traveler left the square and followed a narrow lane that sloped gently toward the sea. Lanterns hung above, their light swaying across the cobblestones in soft golden patches. Beyond them, the sound of waves grew clearer, a steady hush and pull that seemed to breathe through the entire village dot at the end of the lane. The traveler stepped onto the harbor path. The wooden planks creaked softly beneath their feet. The tide was full, brushing against the boats with a slow rhythm. Water glimmered faintly in the lantern light, broken here and there by ripples that spread like silver rings across the surface dot. The traveler walked slowly along the edge, one hand trailing across the worn wooden railing. The night was cool but gentle. Each breath carried the taste of salt. The sea stretched wide into the darkness, where the stars above seemed to scatter themselves into the water's surface, reflections shimmering and fading with every movement of the tide. The boats rocked softly, their ropes creaking in low, steady groans. A few lanterns burned faintly on the decks, left by fishermen who had set out in the early hours before dawn. The traveler paused beside one, watching its flame flicker. Caught between the breeze and the stillness, somewhere further along the shore, a door opened and closed. A faint laugh drifted into the night, then faded, leaving only the sea's constant voice. It was the kind of sound that filled the silence without breaking it. The traveler continued, reaching the very edge of the harbor wall. From there, the view opened completely. The horizon was a dark line where the sea met the sky, blurred by distance. Above it, the stars stretched endless, their light cold and steady. Below, the water breathed in and out, as though echoing the same quiet rhythm that had been felt all through the village. The traveler sat down on the edge of the stone wall, feet resting lightly above the tide. For a long moment, they said nothing, did nothing, only listened. The sea filled every pause, steady and unhurried, like a reminder that time itself could be softer here. Thoughts drifted in, then slipped away again. The past the road traveled, the reasons for coming to this village, they all seemed smaller now, carried off like shells drawn gently back into the tide. What remained was only the present, the quiet harbor, the scent of salt, the lanterns swaying behind them, and the stars above. Endlessly patient. The traveler leaned back slightly, eyes half closed. The stone beneath them was cool, grounding. The air wrapped around their shoulders like a shawl. Every breath came slower, deeper, as though guided by the rhythm of the waves. Somewhere far out, a single light glimmered on the horizon, the faint glow of a ship passing quietly in the night. It moved slowly, steadily, until it blended with the stars, leaving only the vast, dark sea. The traveler watched it fade, then lowered their gaze once more to the water below. The tide lapped against the wall, gentle and constant, as if to say, "You are here, you are safe, you can rest." And so they stayed a while longer, sitting in silence, letting the night speak in its own quiet language. After a long while at the harbor wall, the traveler rose slowly, brushing the cool stone from their hands. The village behind them glowed softly with lantern light, a scatter of warmth against the dark. The sea whispered its endless rhythm, following each step as they began the quiet walk back. The lane leading up from the harbor was nearly empty now. Windows were shuttered, their light dimmed to gentle glows that seeped out in narrow bands across the cobblestones. A faint fragrance of wood smoke lingered in the air, curling upward from chimneys into the star-washed sky. The traveler moved, slowly, unhurried. The lanterns above swayed in the breeze, each one holding a flame that shifted, but never went out. Their glow brushed across the stone walls, catching the edges of carved door frames, the corners of flower pots, the resting shapes of cats curled in sleep. When the traveler reached the square, it was nearly silent. The fountain still flowed, though its sound seemed softer at night, blending with the hush of waves in the distance. The benches stood empty now, the market stalls packed away. The square left only to the night air. The traveler lingered at the fountain's edge, running their hand lightly along the cool stone rim. The water sparkled faintly, catching the lantern light. A memory stirred, not sharp, not heavy, but like a faint echo of other places, other nights. And how rare it was to find one so calm. The inn waited at the corner, its seashell sign shifting gently in the breeze. Through the window, a soft glow spread from a single lamp. The door creaked as it opened, welcoming the traveler into the warmth inside. The common room was nearly empty now. Only one villager remained, sitting quietly with a cup in hand, staring at the fire as it burned low. The innkeeper gave a small nod as the traveler passed, her presence steady, like someone keeping watch without needing to say a word. Upstairs, the traveler opened the door to their room. The quilt was neatly turned down, the candle at the bedside still unlit, waiting. They set their key on the wooden table, removed their shoes, and lay back slowly into the bed. The mattress held them gently, the quilt pulling close with a familiar weight. Through the small window, the stars shone clearly now, countless and bright. Their light seemed to soften as it touched the square below, spilling across the cobblestones and the fountain's surface. The traveler closed their eyes. The sounds wrapped around them, the faint creak of beams in the inn, the hush of the fountain outside, the distant, steady rhythm of the tide. Together, they wove a lullaby without words, guiding the body into stillness. The air smelled faintly of lavender, clean linen, and wood. The pillow was cool at first, then warmed slowly against the skin. Breath by breath, the traveler's body sank deeper. The weight of the road, the day, the world itself easing away like sand slipping back into the sea. And as sleep drew nearer, the village held them in its quiet rhythm. Like the waves, like the stars, like the night itself.